Wow, look at all those people out there.
Hey, y'all. Welcome to California Smalltalkers. We're going to wait a few minutes for more people to join.
In keeping with tradition. Hi, Juan.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Juan.
Hey, Dan.
Oh, yeah, it's starting to get dark at this time these days. Yeah. I'm curious about something. Let's see. There we go. Just for those who are just milling around in the foyer, as it were, I'm curious what Smalltalk you use when you use Smalltalk these days, most of the time. You know,
well, I can't seem to hear anything. I don't know if anyone can hear me. If
Yes, we can.
anyone can hear me, could you just type a message in the chat saying you can hear me?
Yeah.
We can hear you.
But if you were just to type...
Great.
And also...
Well, I don't have much to say. I was mostly just going to listen, so...
Okay. Before you start listening, or while you're listening, why don't you type in the Smalltalk that you use, or no Smalltalk and you just like to hang out here, whatever.
I think he can't hear us.
I use quiz Smalltalk.
That's interesting.
Has someone not fed their cat?
Yeah,
Dan.
yeah. She knows that she doesn't get fed for a while, but she wants to go outside. But it's going to get dark between now and when we're done. So she's just going to have to meow for a while. And she may get escorted out of the room.
May I ask for her name?
The name of the cat is Abby,
Yeah.
which is just a simple version of Abyssinian, which she mostly is.
Now she's a YouTube star.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Vocal talent.
Right. Well, let's see. We're 5 minutes into this, and I think. What do you think, Craig, about
Yeah.
starting it up? Yep. So this is a time we didn't get somebody planned ahead for this meeting, and but usually various people have various things to say, and I didn't want to drop out the meeting completely. So Ted agreed to join me and just sort of have a fireside chat, and meaning basically we've got a couple of general topics that we might introduce, and anybody else can bring up, questions they have that we might be somehow good at answering, or the fireside chat, it can move around, so anybody else can do the chatting who wants to. So with that, let me ask first: does anybody have an announcement that they want to make, or a request to sort of have a specific, kind of 5-minute talk? Well, that will fit right into this, so I don't think you need to do that. Any announcements? Okay. We don't have a speaker for next month, so this is hereby a request for anybody who has some good ideas for that or would like to be that speaker.
Try inviting Elliot. He's I think he would like an invitation.
Good idea. Good idea.
Yeah, we've asked him before. He hasn't been able to do it yet. We're still trying to get him. Yeah. Thanks for that suggestion.
Persistence furthers.
Yeah.
That's right. Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. Ted, do you want to maybe start off and just say a few words about what you're up to, what you're doing with Small Talk, and then the thoughts that you've had? It might be fun to chat about.
Okay, good. Thank you. Let me try to share my screen. I'm Ted Kaehler from the Small Talk group at Xerox in the old days, and Viewpoints Research also, and Apple also. And but now I'm retired and I'm working in nanotechnology. So I'm not actually working in Small Talk, but I keep having these thoughts. So let me just tell you a couple of my thoughts here. Okay. Let's see.
Okay, now you're all too loud, but I know how to fix that myself.
Okay. All right. So it says Google Chrome would like to record my computer screen. Is that necessary? Let's see here. I guess 8x8. Okay. All right.
I believe it is. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. Entire screen. Yes. Share. Okay. And I want to switch screens. Just a moment here. Share. Okay. So why am I stuck? Chrome tab. Chrome. Here we are. No.
You may have to say share a couple of times.
Yeah. Let's see. Entire screen. Yeah. Okay, let's try that one more time here.
Yeah, as I recall, it wants a few permissions, and it's not smart enough to ask for them all at once.
Okay, I haven't even gotten any permissions to come up. So even though it said it wanted some, where would I find those? Let's see. Cancel.
In the Mac system preferences.
I see. But how am I going to know what it is? Let's see. Mac. Yeah, probably actually Chrome preferences is what I'm looking for. But, well, let's see. So let's go up here. Okay, maybe someone else should talk for a while I work this out.
Yep.
Well, I can at least talk a little bit more about the preferences, or the permissions I think it wants. When it asked you for that permission, it should also have given you a button to press that would open up the host operating system preferences for you, which is where you grant the permission.
I pressed it and it did nothing.
Oh.
So let's try one more time. So now when I want to share, it doesn't bring that little thing up, the dialog up. And the share button is not enabled here. So
maybe the dialog got behind your main browser window.
Yes, let's see.
Or if you have multiple monitors.
Yes, I see systems preferences here. I'm sorry. Okay, it was behind. That is correct. Privacy. Okay, allow the apps. Okay, so now, okay, I've gotten to the place where I can see that Google Chrome wants to allow recording, but when I click on it, nothing happens. So I see. Maybe I have to make. Sorry about this. Okay.
No worries.
All right. Okay. Till it is quit. I have to quit and reopen Chrome. That's going to be bad.
Oh, I think maybe so, but we'll see you soon. If you remember the link to this call.
Right, I don't, but okay, I'll figure it out.
Okay. Well, I can type it. I can type it here in the text chat before you go.
Okay. Let's go back. Okay, text chat.
But once he leaves the chat, won't that link disappear with the chat?
Yeah,
I will.
Ted,
I
you
will
should
copy
copy
it.
it. Yeah.
Yes, I will
Yeah.
copy it. Yes. If we weren't computer scientists, I just don't know what would happen here. Okay.
You think that's helping?
Yeah, it's already handicapping us.
Okay. All right. I'll. Somebody else can talk while I reboot here, sort of.
Okay.
I'll say.
For what it's worth, I fixed my sound problem by using Chrome instead of Safari.
Oh, okay. Can you hear us?
Hey, good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Everything's working.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dan?
One of the things that's I've always thought was great about object-oriented programming and about Smalltalk in particular, although Smalltalk falls just a little bit short in this regard, is the ability to do abstract execution, which basically means, a message-oriented program just talks about what messages get sent from one thing to another, and the simplest form of evaluation is, for instance, if you have A plus 3, is you fire up the object A and send the message plus to it, and with a 3, and because A was a number, it performs addition and gives you back a result. But A could actually be a type. It could be the type number, and when it sees the plus, it could do what a type inferencer would do and come back with a number for you. And you can continue that in a number of ways, in a number of other dimensions. For instance, if A were a range, which is 100 plus or minus 10, where you're not sure how the exact size of this part, then it could return a result, which would be added, have this quantity added to it, or it could be a unit. For instance, it could be dollars. It could be $1 and come back with an appropriate change to that. And I wondered if anybody in this crew has played around with sort of all the dimensions you could do with that. It always seemed to me it could make a really neat demo if you sort of rounded up all of the powers available for this and sort of showed them off.
I've done two things along that line. I've done interval arithmetic, which basically you have possibly half open or fully open or closed linear intervals, and you extend arithmetic to them. There's some mathematical complexities that come in, like for instance, your notion of equality is vastly different, but that's part of interval arithmetic. On the more prosaic side, it also did the money thing. You said I was working on a system that used multiple currencies, and I chose the Unicode currency symbol as a binary operator. Or if you go something like 100 currency symbol US dollar, and it would create 100 US dollars. You can add them to other currencies, and they would work as baskets. So $100 plus 100 euro. There's no implicit conversion. You would treat that basket sort of like a portfolio, and you can have different valuation scenarios, but it wouldn't automatically convert from one menu to another. Anyways,
Yeah.
those are two things I've done quite a bit of.
That's cool.
Something I
And
haven't
did they-
done pretty much anything of that's similar is probabilistic programming. But just thought I'd throw that out there.
Hernan, you had something?
Yeah, well, we also did something similar. We call it Aconcagua. It's a model to work with measures. So any kind of measure like distance, volume, even health measures like money and those kind of things. And we also use that to implement SHAL-10, that is a times library, a library to manage the Gregorian calendar, where, for example, the differences between dates or the differences between times are measured with a specific measure of time, for example, 3 days or 10 hours or whatever. And you can convert those measures based on the conversion radio and those kind of things. It's amazing. And that's polymorphic with numbers, in the operations that you can do with numbers, and it's great. It's been a great and very interesting implementation.
That's great. So did you run into troubles like in doing things like type inference that way? Some of, most of the Smalltalk implementations, and it's part of this is my fault, to optimize some of the control structures. And have you run into difficulties with that, and found nice ways around them, so that when you're doing this abstract execution, you get the proper behavior?
I don't quite understand the question, Dan.
Well, let's see. In the case of something like an if true, if false, you don't want to run into the primitive way that gets evaluated. You want it to be something that's completely abstract. So for instance, in that case, something might want to actually evaluate both branches because it's doing type inference, and so it wants to do that. I'm just curious, because we're really close to being able to do a lot of these things, and it's great to hear some of these experiments. But I think that to do a really pure job requires maybe a little bit of work. And I didn't know if somebody's put attention into that.
Still?
I've done a couple other experimental things along this line. Various geometric things, particularly refining spaces like points and vectors. This is similar to the time thing, where you can't add yesterday to today. You can add yesterday to a duration of one day and get today. And it's a lot of times. You start wishing you had a type system, or sometimes you might wish you had multi-methods. It's a little strange going point plus vector, but you can't go vector plus point. Just like putting case-like structures in a lot of the methods.
Yeah, and some of that. Go ahead, Jessel.
I was just going to mention that this thing about optimizing the control structures, that's something that the original self-implementations did as well, Craig Chambers' compiler. But when they did self-3, Urs Hölzel's compiler, they were able to eliminate.
Okay, good.
So you could create non-Boolean objects and send if true, if false, and it would work. In self-3, in self-1 and 2, it wouldn't work. Yep. So as we evolve, I mean, you get computers that are fast enough, and you get more technology. Sometimes we can eliminate these older optimizations, perhaps.
Mhm.
But the other thing that I was going to mention, it's only slightly related to what you were asking. I was trying to do a children's computer in 1989 that the only input was a light pin. So it was a set-top box that was on top of the TV and the light pin. And so it didn't have a keyboard, so you couldn't type in programs. So I came up with the idea of unifying using the computer, programming it, and debugging it with a single interface. So you could click in an object, and then a menu of messages you could send to it would show up, and you'd select one. So if you clicked on 3, then you'd have a bunch of messages. You'd click on plus, and then ask for an argument or whatever. So then you're using the thing like a calculator, and you could use the system. But you could also have abstract objects, so object A. And if you clicked on that and then sent it plus, then it generates code. So until you defined what A was, since it couldn't do that, every time it couldn't figure out, how to evaluate it immediately, it create code that would grow and grow, and then you have a method in it. And for debugging, you'd have something that looked like those VCR buttons. So you'd go next step or play. So you could go forwards and backwards in time, and it'd be like somebody was using the system, was clicking on things. So it's not what you were asking, but the idea was that by having the receiver be unknown, then the result was a code that would execute when you finally define what the receiver was eventually.
Yeah, that's cool.
Let's see if Ted can share his screen now.
Yeah.
Sorry, Alfonso, we'll get back to this.
Ted, you're muted.
Okay, first I have to unmute, then I can try to share my screen. Okay, so I'm still in the situation where the share button is not enabled. So let's try a window. Share that. Nope. Just 1 second here.
Yeah, I think first you have to select the thing you want to share, and then the share button enables.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay. So, okay. Sorry. All right.
Hey.
Okay, good. All right. So now we'd
go.
like to do full screen here. If I can. Oh, come on. Well, it's not giving me very much screen area to show you.
I see only squeak coming from you, though, so it looks like
okay,
full
right.
screen.
But see, I can't see the bottom of the screen. What can I do?
Oh.
Let's see. What does this do? Okay. This button here. That helped a little bit. Okay, I'm just going to have to fake it here. Okay, so there's 3 quick things I want to mention. As I use Squeak, I keep thinking of things I want to do. And so one of them is, if you have, so what happened to my example? Okay. You see that this, this text here, never mind the fact that it appears to be Smalltalk vectors. Let's say that we didn't know anything about Smalltalk vectors here, and it was just text. And I would like to select a column. I'd like to select the 51.88 and the 59.49, just those 2 things. I'd like to be able to select like this, and then have a key combination that said select column, and it would know that this is the column that I want. And so I actually implemented this at Hark, and I need to find the code on my computer and get it running again, because I think it's a kind of a cool thing. Okay, second thing.
Sorry, Ted, two things.
Yes.
I'm gonna mute everyone except for you, just because we're getting some sound from other.
We are.
And then after that, you might remind people what Hark is.
Oh yes. Okay. So this is the.
Okay. So now, Ted, unmute yourself. Sorry, Ted. Try unmuting yourself.
He can't tell us the trouble that he's having doing that.
All right. Yes.
Here we
All
go.
right.
All right.
Now, okay. Okay. Am I back?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So we had a research lab in San Francisco. Alan Kay organized, got this giant research lab started. And this is where Dan did the Squeak.js work. The lively code work was at Hark in San Francisco in the I don't know, ending in 2017 roughly.
Yeah, actually it got started before that, but yes, we did that.
You brought it over, yeah. Okay, and I forget what it stands for, but it was a reference to park, but not exactly park, like as in Xerox. Okay. Let me see if I can scroll to the. Oh yeah. So another idea. So you get the idea about a column. So I'll try to get this out to you guys. The code that lets you select a column of text.
So Ted, the important thing here is that this text just came into your life. It might have been a business message from somebody,
right? In an email or something,
right? Stuff in it.
Yeah. For example, these two here, I like to have just those two dates, like that. Yes. Okay, so another thing is see these scroll bars over here. We have them all the time on our windows. It seems to me that if you're up here, they're pretty far away from everything. So I'd like to have both the up arrow and the down arrow here if the window's big enough. And so why not? Why not have both arrows up and down at the top and up and down at the bottom? And it seems to me this would be very useful for people. Now, because we have scroll wheels, it's not as useful as before. Because I use scroll wheels all the time. But still, it might be worth putting it in to have both the up and the down arrow at the top and the bottom. Okay, the third thing I want to talk about is I find myself often wanting to do spur of the moment calculations. Like here's the stock transactions. I bought 80 shares and I sold the 80 shares in Prudential Financial. And I want to compute how good it was. Okay, so I typed in the difference of the two prices and hit Command P, and I got this $7.61. Okay, but then I wanted to know what percent that was. So I divided it by the starting price here. And I typed Command P for that, and I got this, and it was times 100 here. I should put that in times 100. And so I got 14.7, and then I want to know. Okay, that was over 35 days, but now I want to know what it would have been if I was able to do a transaction this good often. What would it be over a year? So here is this. Okay, 14.7% times 365 over 35 days, and it yields this. So I want to do these cascaded do-its and print-its, and just don't want to have to. What I don't like to do is go back and select the whole thing. I don't want to select this. I just want to click here or click here and say Command P, and have it know what. Basically the first time it finds something illegal on each side, take the stuff in the middle and use it as the selection. So I still haven't found an exact right set of rules for this, but I would like to do that. Anybody have any ideas, you can tell me later. Another thing is to put computation in the middle of text. Like you're doing this word problem here, is it, if how much energy can you spend pumping to grow trees to absorb carbon dioxide? Are you releasing more carbon dioxide to do the pumping? And the answer is, by the way, is almost always no. You can pump a lot of water for the carbon that is in one tree. But you do these kind of little calculations, you just have a bunch of things and there's text mixed in with the calculation. I'd like to be able to select something like this and have it be something legal, say Command P and have it work, where it ignores all the units here, the gallons and the pounds and the feet and all that stuff. And I was happy to hear someone has done dimensional analysis. Herman, did you say you did a dimensional analysis package? And that would be very cool to see. So those are the kind of things I'm thinking about, just kind of little user interface things to make things easier. Anybody have any comments?
Yeah, that would be great. And
I got a couple of comments.
Oh, sorry.
I'll just add a couple of comments. Tiny little nitpick. You don't, on your interest calculation, you're not compounding it properly. You can't just multiply like that.
Right.
But that's just math. Anyway, so a lot of these experiments I do, I actually try to replicate what it's like in Haskell, functional, strongly typed. And one of the approaches I would take in these Smalltalks, and Smalltalk has kind of goopy semantics, is I would just try parsing and guessing at what the proper calculation to do from free text is. And you can sort of try evaluating lots of different code, kind of at random, see what might work. But one of the things, if you start like trying to auto-generate expressions to evaluate, as long as you stay in the functional side effect free part of Smalltalk, which tends to be not too hard to do, no big deal. But there's something kind of scary about generating code to try to evaluate it, and then something weird happens because
So I actually have lots of experience with this. So yeah, that's a really good idea. And I thought of this, basically taking where the cursor is and going to the right and going to the left and making it bigger and bigger and seeing when you get into trouble. And yes, this is very much like the thing which I built, which trial evaluates to see which method might work for these arguments and this result, in the method finder. And so I already know how to do that. So that might work. That's cool.
I often thought it'd be nice to have something a little nicer to denote the functional subset of Smalltalk, similar to the way Scheme, if nothing else, at least uses exclamation point as a convention only to show code that is non-functional.
Yeah, I think there's a general principle here of user interfaces that's if you select in this text and some sort of smart assistant can figure out about 6 possible things that you might want to be computing and spray them up somewhere so that you can all you have to do is point to them. You don't have to do this fancy clicking, as you said, Ted, have to point earlier in the text and later in the text. It would just try a bunch of those. And this is it's a general principle that I know has been used effectively. One of the places is when you're trying to use AI to help a doctor, and the doctor will type something in or say something, and there are about 3 or 4 different things that it could mean. The best thing to do for the doctor, or that they seem to have found, is to not force them to adhere to various formats, but just put up on the screen, the 4 or 5 things that it could have meant, and then the doctor just clicks on that one. So I think that's a generally valuable approach in basically, I guess, the space of computer assistance, programming assistance, powerful system assistance.
Hey, I really like what you're doing with text. It reminds me of Oberon. There's a tool from Plan 9 called Wiley that was based on Oberon, and I took that and implemented that in Java once, and I got a pretty deep appreciation of how powerful just plain text can be, because the whole interface in Oberon is just text, and you can edit the interface and it works.
Wow. Yeah, I should look into that. By the way, the first time I ever saw an attempt at mixed text and computation was at IBM in 1967. So it's been a really long time that people have been trying to do this. They had a system where you could put little tags in text and it would fill in the numbers when you printed it out, and for report generation.
Oh, neat. Emacs's org mode is kind of gets there a little bit. It's not as I don't know, profound as Oberon, but
Yeah, and a real simple example of that is the backtick text in JavaScript. It just sort of helps you out a little bit to kind of mix the two.
I got to pull out one of my favorite jokes here. Oberon is the only system that isn't completely worthless.
Yes.
So I have another wacky question. Microkernels use a message passing paradigm, and I was wondering if anyone's done anything serious with Smalltalk components or islands, something like croquet or something in the microkernel realm.
I did, but I used something that looked more like Objective-C than Smalltalk in 1988 for the PC-18. So it had to be backwards compatible with QNX, which is like Unix, but message passing. But
Okay.
I made it object-oriented using the protected mode of the 286. So each segment was a separate object. It was a system like that. But I just wanted to comment on the idea. I really like the column selection. And I've seen that in live streaming where people code on a YouTube video. I don't know what editor they use. They all seem to use the same one that I think it's runs in the browser or something like that. It's a programming thing. And the basic use they use for columns is selecting a column and moving a little to the left or a little to the right.
it's probably Sublime Text. Sublime has a column select.
Probably. I imagine that there are several tools with that feature, but I have seen it, and it's amazing how much faster they reorganize things compared to a normal text editor that doesn't have that. And people mentioned Oberon, another system that also had the idea that you could mix numbers in the middle of your text and then use them for a calculation, was the Canon Cat that Jeff Raskin did after he was kicked out of the Macintosh. And that was implemented in Forth, so you could select a fragment and evaluate it as if it was a Forth expression. Or if it was a column, you could add. I'm not sure if you could do any other operation other than add a column of numbers, but so that was a nice tool. A lot of people that used it liked it a lot.
Emacs has a tool called rectangles, so you can select, just like Ken did, you can select a piece and then you can cut a rectangle, or you can paste a rectangle. So I wanted to comment on what Dan was talking about earlier of sending sort of arbitrary messages. In the sort of standard, let's call it, programming language world, this is called abstract interpretation. And I built a system at one point where we were trying to find the domains of values of a formula. And so I created, I executed programs. Basically, the idea is that every time there's a conditional in a program flow, it's a partition between two different subdomains of the input space. And so I would start with this variable type. And whenever I did a calculation with it, if it was add or whatever, it would sort of capture that capacity. But if it was a conditional, it would save one of the paths and execute along the other path. And then when it got to the bottom and it had found all the spaces, then it would go and take one of the ones that had been saved away and execute that. So that used Booleans that weren't really Booleans, because comparisons of these values didn't produce Booleans, they produced maybe values. And it was very, very cool to be able to do that. The underlying research didn't pan out because the resulting spaces were too complex, but Smalltalk was a very interesting way to do that. And I had a paper at IWST quite a long time ago about this. I'm trying to remember when. Actually, I think it was in Brest, so it was quite a long time ago.
That's neat.
Yeah, I mean, the weird thing about com selection, Word actually does it. I forget what the combination is, but I was always kind of freaked out because it's not that usable, but you can select vertically in Word. Now I thought that was kind of strange.
So there's a guy who generalized column selection in Emacs. There's a package called multiple cursors you can get where you can create cursors all over your text. And you can go up and down if you want to do a column, but you can actually just place them anywhere you want in the text. And then all of your keyboard commands get processed at all of those points at once. So you can select a whole bunch of things, and then you can start typing, and it'll insert in every cursor at the same time, or delete. And I use this several times a day. It's very, very useful. Usually usually I do columns, but not all the time.
So
one thing that's actually interesting about it is if you use a cursor command, like you start at the beginning of the line and then you say go forward by a word, then all the cursors get ragged and they're all in different places. And then you can maybe delete the next word. And so it's super easy to convert, commas to, like, take a bunch of declarations and convert them into assignments and stuff like that. So.
Yes, this makes me think of something which I guess I have feelings on both sides of. One of the things you mentioned is sort of you plan ahead and place your cursors in the right place, and then you have all this power. And one of the most satisfying things I ever did was to add the repeat change command that's in Squeak, which violates the user interface principle, which is basically that it remembers what you just did, even though there's not a manifestation on the screen. But the principle that feels good about it is to be able to do somewhat powerful things without having to plan ahead. So in this particular case, you make a change and then you realize, oh, you want to change it in the following, in the remaining places. You don't have to have decided that ahead of time and made the and invoked a repeated change command. You just say change again, and it knows that you're trying to do the same thing. And I think that's a general principle, just as in Squeak, not having to declare temporaries ahead of time, but to be able to very quickly just essentially push a button and get them declared. And I was disappointed in some recent Squeak I used that seemed to not be as easy as it used to be. But I wonder if people have other cases of this where there's something that it's sort of a more powerful execution that you don't have to plan ahead for, because I think it's a real way to help people.
Well, in terms of the text editing, I've often, once you've got like multiple undo redo, sometimes you get in this situation, I want to go back and undo something like 10 edits ago, but then I want to play the other ones I did forward still, and I almost wish that the piece of text was being modified to like a Smalltalk image, so I have the change log. I could just go edit the one change and then replay them all.
Right.
Oh yeah, something that's great for that is the undo tree.
Yeah.
I think it came out of Vim first, but it's in Emacs too, and you can go back. It pops up another frame, shows you what starts out as a line, but you can go up and down in it and go and unwind the undo stack, and then if you make other changes, it makes a branch in the undo tree, and go down that one and do some edits or whatever. And then you could just navigate around the tree however often you want. So that's a very nice unplanned gizmo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Let's see, Alfonso, did you still want to say something? You have your hand up here on 8x8.
Yeah. Dan had asked about creating like control structures for Smalltalk and polymorphism. And I had some time ago realized that I really didn't adopt the object-oriented mindset as well as I had thought after several decades when I found in my code I was using I'm going to say testing the class type in order to separate code. One of the things I've come up with, or in my mind to frame things, is I use the concept of an executable sequence, a set of lines of code, sequential lines of code that do something depending on that particular type or class of the object. And in doing this, I came across going through the design patterns and reorganizing the way they were classified so that they were easier for me to figure out which pattern to use in a particular case. And I grouped several into what I call the dispatch patterns that will execute a particular executable sequence depending on both on the class, and I realized that was one way of making sure that the correct behavior was assigned for the correct receiver. But I also realized that there were other ways or for other occasions where you would want to perform some other action based on the arguments, for example, that were passed, that you would want to have a different set of behaviors that the way the system would respond. With this this list of dispatch patterns and thinking of the correct executable sequence that you wanted to invoke, I started thinking of other control structures and using some of the other design patterns in order to do it. So I'm coming up with some patterns or some constructs to do based on particular state, writing a construct that you define in your code separate states or values from an enumerated type, for example. But rather than test an object against each type individually, you can define the structure that has what the type is and then the correct behavior to execute. And so that you don't have to run a test for the in your code directly. You would just use this construct to manage it for you when you needed it to go to the correct executable sequence.
Yeah. That's good.
Ted, shall we throw it back to Dan?
So in my list of things, I don't know, there's a very, very general thing which about object-oriented programming that has always felt good to me, and it's not the kind of thing that you start out saying, I want this to be true, but the mere fact of organizing things just on the basis of sending messages tends to make a system in which it's easy to build unanticipated structures, to do things you wouldn't have thought of ahead of time, and that's always that's been the most fun for me in building a system like that. You get to do these wacky things like turning the browser on its side, which you didn't set out to do that, but you tried to keep everything general, and it just happens. And some of those other demos, and I wondered if people had any of their own sort of aha moments when they put a couple of things together and they never would have thought of doing that, but it just turned out to be easy.
Dan, may I ask you a question? I interrupt you, and please, people, answer Dan's questions afterwards. That property you just said, that building a system with messages allows for unexpected. Can you repeat it, please?
Oh, it just it allows for unanticipated constructions.
And that property is something that you thought as a message-based system would have, or is something that you found out after building it? I'm very interested in that kind of questions. What kind of things you were objectives for some feature in Smalltalk and object systems, and what other properties were just things that were found out to be true later?
Well, I guess no, I mean it's a general architectural principle of how you put things together, and if all that's happening is sending messages, you can't break anything by putting something together that doesn't make sense. But if it turns out that it could make sense, you may only have to change one or two things to get them hooked up. I mean, some of these in the past have been sort of sight gags, it's kind of jokes. But some of the others have just turned out that, oh my gosh, we can do the same thing in all these different ways, in all these different situations, and it works and is applicable there.
Oh, I got one simple personal example. Happened to be early on. It's like VisualWorks way early. There's a class called FileName that's just sort of it's just sort of mostly a string, but it knows how to do various file kind of operations. So I made a class called FTP FileName that had all of the protocol that mostly just get the whole contents and set the whole contents of this quote file name. Anyways, I did that, and then I forgot about it. At one point, I was editing what I thought was a local file in my GUI, and I went to hit save, and the save cursor comes up, And normally when I save a file, it just goes, you blink to save. But this one saved, and it's like, it took like 4 seconds to save. And it's like, why is it taking so long? What's wrong with it? I dug behind it. It's like, oh, this isn't a local file. This is a remote file. But, so of course it just worked. I hadn't realized I was using this thing. It's mostly just, because the tool that was using it depended on a very abstract interface. Get the resource associated with this name or set the resource, very loosely coupled, which is kind of what you get with Smalltalk.
Yeah.
One experience. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, Ethernet protocol. One experience I had that is related to what you asked, Van, was turning Squeak's morphic system into quiz morphic system. In quiz morphic, each morph has its own space, its own coordinate system. It defines its own origin, orientation of the x and y axis, and a scale. And the way I came from Squeak implementation to this was in very small steps, and the system never stopped working. So it took me a very long time to get this working, because doing a lot of small steps means repeating or going over the same stuff many times, one and another. But having a working system, it was for me the only way for this to be possible. So in a particular state of the system, what I needed to find is what assumption do I want to change now, okay? And those assumptions are implicit in the message sending patterns. So sometimes it's just building a new polymorphic object with a slightly different behavior, and sometimes it's adding a different message and changing a sender. But all these very gradual behavior changes into a system that is completely different and totally incompatible were enabled by this property of message systems allowing unexpected growth or evolution. So I think it's related to that. It's an experience where this is an enabler, because doing this as design from scratch would have required a lot of things I didn't have, like a big chunk of very focused time, and perhaps money, and perhaps more people working on this and brainstorming. Doing it all myself meant I needed to go in very small steps, and to be easy to go back a few steps if I found that I went a bad trail, okay? So, and not get lost.
Yes.
So all this was in them.
And to keep it alive for motivation.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And also for knowing that if for whatever reason I have to stop, at least I got to the best I knew at each moment. And that's a very important property if you don't know the future.
Yeah.
I have a similar. I was going to say, I have a similar comment. Go ahead.
Okay. The Julia team ran into this kind of a property that you're describing, Dan. They made a present. So in Julia, they have multiple dispatch, and they made a presentation called The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Multiple Dispatch, and they discovered a whole bunch of unexpected reuse coming out of Julia programs because they use multiple dispatch. So it reminded me when you were describing the scenario, it reminded me of that presentation.
Neat. Mike, did you have a comment?
Oh yeah. So I spend a fair amount of time in Haskell, static type, and of course, Smalltalk dynamic type. And one of the sales pitches in the static type world is, you can have the types structure your system and tell you what to do. If you get the type system right, it's difficult to write incorrect code. And sometimes I'm in Haskell and I know what I'm doing. I have a very clear conception of the structures I want. And I write the types, and it lives up to its promise. But one of the things that I've noticed is sometimes I want to do something and I don't know the right way to do it. Half the time I don't even know what I want, and then I'm just sitting there. There's no way to build anything smoothly in Haskell if you don't kind of have a plan in mind. Whereas in Smalltalk, I can just play around. I want to make some new kind of object. I just go object new and start pretending to send it messages. I mean, I don't even have to pretend. I just send it messages. I was like, oh yeah, maybe it needs to do this, and it just makes it easier to play around. And the dynamic system, I guess the point I'm trying to say is it helps me discover what I want. And if you don't know what you want, these statically typed systems are really harsh.
Yeah, there's that first time when you're sort of groping around for what you want to do, and it's very motivating just to be able to lay down a little bit of code, maybe get the first 2 levels of what you want.
Yeah, not to mention when you start a Smalltalk project afresh, you've got an entire image that's got all this incredible stuff, and then you're starting a Haskell project afresh, and I've got, oh look, an empty file. I guess I better import something. You never feel like it's almost like in Smalltalk, you're already started with a working application. You just have to do a little maintenance on it to get it to do what it does plus what you want.
Yeah.
The classic diamond is the static language versus dynamic language, where you start with a static language and you get something that's fast but broken, and you debug your way to the end of the project. In the dynamic programming, you get yourself something that works, but may not be fast enough, and then you tune your way to your product. Sorry, just classical history there.
Now, about the unreasonable effectiveness, what really surprised me, at least the first 10 years of Squeak, was when somebody would report a bug, then would say, oh, but that was already in the original Xerox Smalltalk, so how has it been working all these years? When somebody will say, oh, I just fixed this bug. It hasn't happened that much in the last 15 years, but at least in the first 10 years of Squeak, I was always shocked at some bug that would get fixed, and the system has been working with that bug, for decades. So I don't know other systems that do that. The other systems are so fragile that, a little thing and it all comes crashing down. So how come Smalltalk keeps working with these bugs inside of it? And I think it's related to the message passing, the robustness. I mean, so you're talking about something that you were not anticipating. I wasn't anticipating that it would still work with that thing in it.
Yeah, that happened a couple of times, and it always amazed me.
What was that, Dan?
It has surprised me at times how resilient things can be. My favorite example is the one when I think I wrote this down somewhere recently, but we were running a Smalltalk class, and I got called over because this girl had she had a problem where she had a bug in the middle of refreshing a window, and it was dying down in the bitblit code. And I thought, how could that be? And it turned out that what she had been doing was implementing her own fraction number, and in the window resizing code, it had done a division, and her code had faithfully produced a fraction as the result of one of the coordinates, and Bitblit didn't know what to do about that. But it turned out that we just went down in the very bottom of things, and I said, well, let's see. I see that Bitblit is meant to handle floating point coordinates. Do you have a way to come up with a floating point value for your fractions? And she said, oh yeah, just do this. So we did that in the same place that Bitblit handled floating point coordinates, and proceeded, and the window finished reframing with fractional coordinates, and the whole system worked that way. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
One thing that we were talking about things from way back, and one of the sort of desiderata that Ted had always had was that you never lose your typing, and we've had systems that did that to a greater or lesser degree, and we've probably all had times when we wished that something somewhere had just been holding on to the text we typed, even if in a completely unstructured way, just if there was keyboard history. And I wonder what
I got a funny story along those lines. So VisualWorks again. VisualWorks would remember the last 5 things you copied. Sort of had a little copy buffer history. And it was there. And so Park Place, they would release a new image, and it's like, I get the new image, and I go look at the previous paste buffers. I told Elliot, cool, I get to see the last 5 things you typed in before you prepare the image for release. So the next release, the copy selection buffer is filled with lines that say, welcome to Park Place, copyright, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
There was also static variable, like class variable, and PostScript printer had the last PostScript printer in it, and it was Mothra. And I was talking to Andrei Valud, and I told him, "Did you know that there's Mothra in the Park Place image?" And he goes, "What are you talking about? I thought Mothra is like one of Godzilla's." And it says, "Yeah, that one." And yeah, it's like the image never forgets.
So much for security.
Oh yeah, there's another can of worms. Sorry.
I just want to say this is a point at which those who are not seriously devoted to this conversation are welcome to leave. And although the floor has been open the whole time, I'm not going to steer things henceforth. If anybody wants to bring up things, in this sort of general area, things that you've wished the user interface did, wish that Smalltalk did, or things that you found out turned out to have really good leverage or be a real problem, it's good. It's a good time to chat about it.
I have a totally random question that has nothing to do with any of that, but is for Ted. And feel free to not answer this if you don't want to, because it has less to do with Smalltalk. But when I was reading your Wikipedia profile, right before it mentions that you met Dan, it mentions that you learned APL while you were at Stanford. And I figured that if it was worth mentioning in a Wikipedia page, there might be a story behind that. And the background for this question, as at least one person knows, because I work with Dave, is that I'm a C++ developer, but I'm a huge APL and array language fan, and I host a podcast on array languages. And I know that there has been some influence on Smalltalk from APL, but anyways, like I said, feel free not to answer the question if it's totally off topic.
No, I have two things to say here. First, my first programming language was Fortran, and my second programming language was APL because I was a high school student at an IBM Scientific Center laboratory. And it was really quite a shock going from Fortran to APL. And I thought, why, I just figured that every language except for Fortran was like APL, where you have these amazing operators, and you have to juggle all these matrices in your head and things like that. And so I became an APL fan. So when Dan and I worked for another researcher at Park, and we met Alan Kay in the hall and fell into a programming discussion in 1972, spring of 1972, Alan asked us each what programming languages we liked. And I said APL, and I was very surprised that Alan agreed with me, that he liked parts of APL also. And Dan, I forget what you said, but
I was an APL fan too.
Yes, right. All three of us. So it did have an influence on Smalltalk, not in the way you might think, but some of the cleanliness and generality, I think, of Smalltalk might have come from APL, since all three of us were fans of it. Yeah.
I took CS at Purdue, and Tom Murtaugh was the instructor, and it was a programming language. It was the class on learning programming languages. So doing an FP interpreter and that kind of stuff, and Lisp and whatever. And he would hand out APL crossword puzzles. So like 3 o'clock was a function that did this, and of course in APL you could do that function 5 different ways. So you had to. I don't know if the APL crosswords are still out there. Probably in somebody's head. I don't know. But it was very interesting doing APL crossword puzzles as homework assignments.
Egad.
Amazing.
The debt to APL goes out in many ways. If you think of the whole image approach, saving the image that we have, it's not the same thing. But we definitely had that feeling for a workspace and the ability to save a workspace and come back to a workspace just as it was. And of course, we extended that so that you also got the screen back the way it was. And this was really important to students, because we would have students who came in to use the altos. They couldn't have an alto at home. So they'd come in, they did have their own personal disk pack. So they put the disk pack in, fire up the alto, and do their work. And at the end of the day, what could they do? How would they save all that stuff? Did they write notes down or what? No, they just saved the image, the Smalltalk image, from the very beginning of our Smalltalk systems, on their disk, pulled the disk out of the machine. And then the next week when they came in, they put it back in, and they were in the exact same place, same bits on the screen. And that's been important to us all along, and that we really owe that gestalt, I think, to the APL workspace feeling.
That's awesome.
And there's also it must be said. APL's there's a lot of sort of polymorphism to the APL array notion, and that same leverage applies throughout Smalltalk, and especially in the inheritance hierarchies.
Yeah, the last thing I'll say too is there's another podcast. So like the podcast that I host is called Arraycast. There's another podcast on functional programming called LambdaCast, and I've mentioned this to Dave that I would love for there to be a podcast called like OOcast, but I do not have the bandwidth. But if there's someone out here in this crowd that knows someone that does have the bandwidth and the tech savviness. I think that, yeah, Smalltalk and the OO paradigm, that's not classically taught these days in school, but that was sort of discovered or created, has a lot to be learned from. So yeah, I'm just throwing that out there if there's anyone out there that wants to start that, because I would be one of the very first subscribers.
I'd love to do some more episodes of the Smalltalk Reflections podcast, but I found it worked best with at least one other co-host.
Oh wait, so there is like an OO cast out there right now?
Yeah, it's called Smalltalk Reflections, but we haven't done an episode in a couple of years. So I'll pivot on your request with another request. If there's anyone here who would like to be a co-host of such a thing, please let me know, because the machinery to do episodes is all set up.
I would like to be a co-host.
Great. Yeah, it'd be fun to record some more episodes and get a bank of them going, and then start releasing them again.
I don't know how much bandwidth is required, but I'd certainly be interested in working on that too, Greg.
Cool. Yeah. Anyone who's interested, please write a comment in the comment section of this meetup.
When I was first
I
learning
would love to see
Smalltalk,
Yeah.
I would love to see that podcast. I saw a video on YouTube that Dan did, I think sometime in the 80s or 90s, in which he was working at Apple at the time, and he talked about how at Park they had solved some problems with, they'd written applications, they had written the system and some applications with Smalltalk, and then reviewed their work and started over again and reviewed the work, and they did this 4 times. And so they've really developed the ideas of object orientation and the sending messages, and that the philosophy of designing these systems that I think we don't have. And like I said, even after having, I guess it was almost 3 decades after going through the Byte magazine issue with Smalltalk and really loving the concepts, that I still didn't have it correctly until I started diagramming my code and seeing what was wrong. I think getting into the meat of what they developed by the end of that time period when Smalltalk 80 came out, and even the research that they've done since then, if we can learn what they learned, instead of all these people who saying that object orientation doesn't solve the problems, and they get the whole concept wrong. I really think that we really need to get that taught to. It's like Disney animation. You have the old school animators. You want to pass that knowledge on to the next generation before they retire. So we really need to get everything that's going on from the horse's mouth.
Mm-hmm.
I think somebody needs to. I was going to say, I think somebody needs to explain what model view controller really is to modern web developers. Because right now, the view is the entire web page, and the model is what's running on the server. I try to explain it to people about how the value of being able to put different views on objects and having a fine-grained approach, but it's too abstract.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say one little thing, Alfonso, that I thought about while you were saying that. The fact that we got to go through those sort of cycles of creation was a huge luxury. That was the wonderful thing about working for a research center and working for a visionary like Alan. But there's no substitute for being able to build a system and then actually use it and then throw it away. I mean, if possible, you want to have the next version running before you do that. But that's it's nowadays there's so much investment in the systems that are being built. It's very hard to think of, completely changing everything and doing it all over again, just because it would be a little bit cleaner, a little bit more general. And I think, well, I guess you see that kind of thing in typically starting with just one or two people who have their own time and they're, and they just are devoted to it and will keep cleaning stuff up and adding new features, but throwing away stuff that doesn't carry its weight. But that is how things go forward. And, yes, we learn from the past. Absolutely. Some of the things that have been done in the past are, they're eternal values. But I think also I hold as much hope for, the creative inspiration going forward, because, the needs and the perspective is changing, year by year and decade by decade. So there's, I think, just, keep the faith and keep being willing to build new systems.
I was
1980,
also
the
curious.
end of history.
I was curious, since you and Ted are mentioning APL and inspirations you drew from it. Paul Graham talks about the productivity gains that he can get from, or teams can get from using Lisp systems in some of his essays for startups. And, most startups still are not using Lisp for developing their systems. But I was curious whether, he talks about the macro capability and how that allows so much power to be added to the system. What did you not like the macro capability that Lisp has, and did you were you interested in employing some of the other ideas from Lisp in what you were working with in object orientation?
Well, I can speak personally, which is I had a very rudimentary knowledge of Lisp when I was working on Smalltalk. So, and the sort of examples I had worked on in it seemed, they were simple, and yes, they were general, but they were subtle. And somehow what we started with in Smalltalk just seemed less subtle. And I could have learned from doing several of the things that the Lisp folks did. And I knew that Peter Deutsch, who I knew anyway, had done a bytecode interpreter for his Lisp. And I knew that was, I thought, man, I can see how that would work here. And especially with Alto microcode, where you can basically put the interpretive overhead under the memory cycle, so that, that was an idea that suffused its way across the boundaries at Bark. But I didn't have, and you talk about the macros. I mean, I think we did things like that in Smalltalk. And certainly the user interface, the program editor, it's not Emacs, but it has a lot of similarly motivated features and not as deep. I don't know, each group sort of picks its own priorities and forges its own path, and the ones that end up the successes, sort of spread out through the community. So Lisp has enriched the whole community in many ways, and I think Smalltalk has too. But yeah, I wasn't pulled that way at all, because I didn't know enough. I probably would have done, I might have done blocks a little bit differently if I had known more about Lisp. But I think some of the ways that blocks wound up was a good thing. So.
Yeah, having fully lexical closures is certainly something that came from Lisp via Scheme. But if you're interested in macros, I have a buddy who actually did a macro package in Smalltalk, basically by taking the open code rewriting part that does things like if true, if false, and to by do, all those open coded things in the compiler. Because if you look at the internals of the compiler, it really is just a specialized internal hard-coded macro system. He kind of made it into a full macro system. It only took like a handful of methods to actually turn into a full-on macro system. And I actually played around with it for a while. First off, you turn out not to, want macros as much in Smalltalk as do in Lisp. What they do with macros, we tend to do more with tools. But I actually did play around with them a significant amount. One of the interesting little gotchas that I got was actually, I tend to code way too much inside of a workspace. And somewhere along the line, VisualWorks with its syntax highlighting and all that started parsing the workspace like on every single keystroke. And the problem, which is fine, if the code didn't parse, it just wouldn't highlight. But when I started to try to type a macro that didn't actually exist, but actually try to do the macro expansion, the parser, since the macro didn't exist, it would invoke the expander, and the parser would basically throw a does not understand, because I couldn't, my quick workaround was just to type the name of the macro somewhere and then paste it in. So at least it macro expanded syntactically in one operation. It was interesting to see that interaction because he basically didn't have anything in the parser for reporting a failed macro expansion as a parse error rather than just does not understand. But I did set F if there's any Lisp people out there, and it was fun to play around with. I never did anything significant. It was still in the playing part, but I still think particularly if you look at the areas which have like code generation, like generate accessors. Anytime if you actually look at the code that generates those accessors, it's doing it via what's in essence a string macro rather than a syntax macro. And it really seems like you really want to be doing that stuff with syntax macros.
I'll give a quick reflection on that. I think macros frequently are used in place of teaching the compiler something. And the problem with them is particularly inadvertent capture. And the Scheme folks spent a lot of time doing hygienic macros, which at least got over those particular problems, although introducing another bunches of complexity. But I think, I believe the dictum that one learns more readily from error than from confusion. And macros, particularly where they do inadvertent capture, are hell to debug. And if you're using other people's macros, 3 or 4 other people, the complexity in your program can go exponential really fast. And so you have to be very judicious and very restrained in your use of that, and very clear on exactly what they're being used for and where and what part of the system, and how that's going to interact with your debugging experience and your communication among team members. And for that reason, my personal usage of the macros has always been minimal, even in Scheme where you've got hygienic macro systems. I always try to work on a design that I feel if it's simple enough, even I can implement. And if I can find the particular facets that make something more comprehensible or appear simpler to me, that's generally a good way of going things. And I found with macros, it's particularly the standard list macros. There are a lot of very clever things you can do, but the complexity can go exponential just really fast, and they're really hard to debug. Anyway, so I think.
Hi, Ken. I wanted to add one thing about Lambda, sort of blocks and lambdas that Dan was saying is that one simple use of macros is to not type the word lambda. And I think Dan's design of blocks syntactically made it not necessary, right? People are quite comfortable typing blocks. And so that eliminates one major use of macros in a lot of Lisp systems. But the thing I wanted to ask is that Alan always talks about sort of reinventing Smalltalk and sort of building bigger and better object systems. And I was wondering, this has been I can see that all of us have a love for the Smalltalk system, but I wonder, the MOP system of Common Lisp or multiple dispatch, someone mentioned Julia. I wonder for all of you who've worked on Smalltalk systems, right? Does it come a time where the single dispatch class-based object system sort of, you feel its limits and that there's something more fundamental to be improved upon that to, I think there was a talk on self before, maybe that was one avenue, but maybe this is a thing we can talk about.
I think traits was a good way of eliminating a bunch of code duplication. I think they caused some other things, some other problems, just in terms of the complexity. But I think as a way of eliminating trivial code duplication, traits were a good substitute for multiple inheritance. On the other hand, when I was writing in Common Lisp, we did virtually no refactoring because the code always just seemed to work. We didn't have to worry about moving things up and down or down a hierarchy and so forth. Just from a practical standpoint.
If I may recommend that you take a look at the Slate language. I can type it into the chat, but it's very Smalltalk-like, self-like, but it's has multiple dispatch. And Brian Rice basically opened the Squeak browser in the window, and he retyped it, most of the class library into Slate, converting it to multiple dispatch. So if you want to see what Squeak would look like with multiple dispatch, just look at the Slate files, the .slate files. Let me see if I find the link and post it here.
But if I can ask Dan, specifically, like you've been working on Squeak.js and the JavaScript-based ones, like all these years working on Smalltalk, have you felt sort of limited by the design of Smalltalk, or where you go like, I've reached the limits of this, the message passing is nice and all these things, but here's a point where, something else.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't been exploring new ground so much recently. The one thing I can say is that there's always a trade-off in terms of simplicity and subtlety, and I've shied away from. I mean, people have done really neat things with domain-specific languages and embedding them in the middle of Smalltalk or other languages, and that can be really powerful. But it's always bothered me if you need to learn more than a certain amount to get started, and ideally go all the way and read other people's code and stuff like that. And that's what I say. I've felt a little bit of that subtlety barrier with Lisp. There it was a matter of, how deep do you need to go? I mean, shoot, I didn't put a case statement into Smalltalk because I didn't think it was that needed, and it would have been another thing to have to learn. And of course, you can get along without it. But truth is, I've occasionally thought, "Damn, how do you do a case in Smalltalk?" Yeah. So I haven't.
When you do a case in Smalltalk, it's method dispatch, right? I mean, that's that's Smalltalk.
Exactly. Yeah, that's how you do those things. And if they're
what if you want full on pattern matching?
But it's still method dispatch. Like it's
right. You would be recapitulating it if you had a case statement.
If you had put a case statement in Smalltalk, then Peter Deutsch couldn't have used it as an example in the Byte magazine article.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what his article was about, implementing control structures, and he implemented case statement.
You know, I'm glad you brought up that example, because that was a real. It felt so great to be able to do our own control structures as soon as we got context working, and that just blew everything out. You know, it's, oh my God, we can do the debugger in the source language. Yeah.
Yeah, this content is great. Once, just for fun, I implemented goto as a message sent to this context.
Right. I don't think you're the first. Yep.
There's a philosophy that well, we know about the goto-less programming, but have you looked at if-less programming, where you're not using if statements and are relying on other design patterns or constructs in order to select a different block to execute, or some other executable sequence?
I think I found myself doing something like that once or twice, and then sort of scratching my head and saying, "Oh, this is interesting," and it sounds like you're referring to something specific. I don't know something specific like that, but I did. I remember some of the work that Carver Mead did on some of the early silicon work had that same aspect of doing instruction flow in a processor, and where there's a conditional that would have taken some time to switch the state in the processor, and instead you just ran multiple paths there, and so that something either did get added in or didn't get added in depending on the condition codes, that kind of thing. So that's a little bit like ifless, and I bet Jessel knows a lot more about that. But did you have a specific case of that?
Nothing in particular in Smalltalk that I've seen that relates to it. I mean, I've seen some code with if statements and or if false, but or if true or if false. But I just trying to avoid creating these conditionals where it just sends the message. And if it's, for example, a null object, I use the null object pattern to avoid having to test a condition at runtime and just let the correct object, behave the way it should, because if you're testing the condition, you should already have, like if you set a state flag, a state variable, well, you already know, the state that your system is in. Just use the appropriate object, and it'll resolve automatically.
Yeah, like the terminal nodes in a tree, so that you don't have to test for them. Yeah.
I mean, a lot of that, I believe, comes from kind of pressing Booleans into cases where you just gave some cursory thought, and you thought, there's two cases, and said, oh, I'll just use a Boolean. I mean, sometimes, if X is less than Y, it's, if you got to compare two ordinary numbers, you're going to be hard pressed to avoid Booleans there. But my canonical example is, if you model, say, gender by a Boolean, you might go, oh, we'll just do, is male. It's either true or false, which, that ignores the whole we don't know thing, as opposed to creating perhaps, using symbols or actually creating singletons to represent some particular gender. So if you just instead created a male singleton and a female singleton, you get in essence the same kind of thing, but it gives you an expansion path should someone say, oh, there's more than two genders. You go, okay, I'll just make more singletons.
We had an interview question in our company.
The areas where they're not applicable.
We had an interview question at our company where I would ask people to develop just how you would write in Smalltalk, how you'd write a security system without using any Boolean logic. And there was one guy who did not know anything about multiple dispatching and actually figured it out during the interview.
To hire him?
We did. Yes, we did.
That's good.
I was so impressed. I was like that. And then we had another guy who it took about, and normally it took 20 minutes for people to answer the question or to fail. But there was one guy, it took him about, I think, less than a minute and a half to answer it. And then he went on at length describing all the different benefits of and nuances of multiple dispatch, or of double dispatch. So it was pretty neat.
Well, I'm inclined to move for adjournment unless somebody else has another topic, or at least I think a better way to put it is I'm going to adjourn, and everybody's welcome to continue this space. It's been fun talking about all these things, and it's especially great to do it with people that have so much experience to reflect on.
Cool, and thanks, Ted.
You're welcome. This was a wonderful discussion. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Ted.
We'll keep the room open until the top of the hour.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
I do have a question for Ted that has absolutely nothing to do with GUIs. So,
okay.
In the Green Book, there's the chapter about the virtual memory system, Loom. Was it any good?
So we did build it. It was way too slow.
Okay.
Yes, and also also that as soon as they're worth 64-bit machines, we didn't have to worry about this anymore. Sorry, 32-bit machines. We were working with 16-bit machines. As soon as they were 32-bit machines, we did not have to worry about the kind of issues that Loom treated. But oddly enough, there was a patent at Apple that I didn't know about that was essentially Loom done again. Okay, and then there was also a patent at Kodak that was also it was done by a guy who was building his own word processor, but then it was bought by Kodak. So there were two other people who had the same kind of ideas as Loom. Yeah, but my experience was it was way too slow, and we didn't need it in the end. So I'll tell you another story. So Bert Sutherland, who is the director of our part of Park, he and I were walking down the stairwell. It'd be such a good idea. And he was right. I wish I had listened to him right then.
You know, I wanted to say one thing about this. It's funny how you get sort of interesting, unanticipated fallout from various things. So one of the cool things that Ted did with Loom, or that we did, I can't remember exactly how, but so Ted wrote the code for Loom in Smalltalk. So there were actually two cooperating Smalltalk images, and one of them running Loom and the other one running Smalltalk. And the plan was to, and what we did was to translate the side that was simulating Loom into BCPL to essentially be a primitive, which we did. And that sort of stuck in my head. The whole compiler decompiler facility in Smalltalk allowed him to generate. Ted, you should fill us in, but to generate the BCPL code from the Smalltalk. And that was in the back of my head and became the thing that made me realize that we could do Squeak the way we did.
Huh, I didn't know that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
So slang was actually inspired by the way we did the BCPL translation.
Yeah, and not in any sort of specific way, but I mean that thought pattern was there, and I realized, oh, wait a minute, we could just do that.
Yeah. Wow. Oh, neat.
There's an Alan Kay video where he talks about how Smalltalk isn't ready for programming in the large. It was in the 80s, I think, was the 90s. Do you gentlemen have any ideas on how or what could be done, or why it's lacking in that regards, and what can be done to overcome that?
May I say something? I think he's wrong. I wrote very big Smalltalk systems, so I don't know why somebody could say that it's not working for in the large. That's all I have to say.
And how large did he mean?
Oh, in my case, there were like 15,000 classes. I'm talking about 2005, 2006. We were using Visual Age Smalltalk. One important thing for the success of the project was the Envy CMS system. Envy is really cool to work in groups when using Smalltalk. But yeah, it was a very big system and it worked pretty fine. And you also have, I don't know, the JP Morgan Capital system. It's a distributed 24 hours, 7 days a week. And, it's a very, very big system working since 1995, 1996. Of course, it's, the database is Gemstone and so on, but, it's a very, very large system. So, I'm not sure. I'm not sure Smalltalk is not suited.
I don't think Alan Kay was talking about the size of the system. I thought he was talking about the size of the teams working on a single system or a product. I think that's the bigger issue. If you have 20 programmers or more developing a system, how do you coordinate their efforts being bound by the Smalltalk issue, if that's the primary concern he had? I don't know.
I didn't know it was Alan Kay who said that, but no, now I have to think what I said. But at the end, I think it all depends on how you structure the team and the processes that you use to share the code and those kind of things. For example, in the company I used to work, when we built that big system, we started from scratch every day with a new image, and we were sure that every day we could develop and deploy the system, and those kind of things really help to get the team working, and we were around 10 people working on that system, and we have a very specific integration process. We even wrote an automatic integrator that merged code from different branches and so on. And I think that one important technique that we use that helped a lot was automatic testing. We did a lot of TDD and automatic testing. We had at that time like 27,000 tests that cover almost 80% of the system. And we found that to be very important. When you're working with dynamically typed languages, having automatic tests, it's very, very important. So yeah, that's all I have to say about it.
Was this at Miramar?
Excuse me?
Was the company called Miramar?
No. The company was an Argentinian company based in Buenos Aires. It's called Mercat. And we wrote a financial system. Yeah. So I have a question, Dan. I don't know if you're still there, but I'd like to know if Forth influenced in some way on the development of the VM, because it's very similar how Forth worked and how the VM works. So I don't know if there is some relationship there or not.
I think Dan has stepped away.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm still here. I
Oh,
couldn't
great.
resist. But I didn't get exactly what your question was about the VM.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, and you know the language Forth.
Yes.
Yeah. So I wanted to know if Forth influenced in some way on how you develop this Smalltalk VM, you and your team, because it's very similar, the idea of having a stack, and you know everything works with the stacks and so on.
Yeah. So I was interested in Forth, you know, in the same way that I was, well, no, in a different way with APL. And using the stack as a way of doing things. So it wasn't a conscious thing. I was blown away by how simple you could make things in Forth, and did several attempts to try to do a Smalltalk in Forth, you know, an object-oriented Forth, and I kept running up against the thing that, you know, what the big difference there is memory management and being able to have objects that, you know, are separate things unto themselves. So I think I have to say that, yeah, that was at work in the back of my mind, but it wasn't, I didn't try to recreate anything. I mean, the structure of the interpreter, I mean, the first one was just do what it takes. and then the Smalltalk 76 engine, that just sort of all came to me, and it just followed what it needed to do the things that we were doing in Smalltalk 72 in a compiled way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Yeah. Forth is cool, no doubt.
Yeah. It's cool to write, not so cool to read.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I've done Forth processors and object-oriented Forth processors as well. So,
So Alan, sorry, Dan, I confused the name. You at the beginning, you asked about type inference, and I wanted to know if you ever tried to apply the Milner type inference algorithm. The one is used in ML or standard ML. Have you tried to implement that in Smalltalk?
No, I haven't. You know, I did that exercise with Alan Borning, and we wrote a paper about it. And and I haven't done. Yeah, I think I did revisit it at one point. I just tried to see what you could do, just looking at everything that was done in the system. You know, but no. That's the answer is no.
Okay. Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'm not sure if it's completely applicable, because sometimes in SML you have to define types, and you have to say, okay, this variable or this function is of this particular type. But it's interesting how it's infers the types of the things. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. I'm pretty much a fan of what they did with Strongtalk.
Oh, okay.
Not that you know is all there could be, but they did a nice job with their traits and with making the types optional.
Yeah.
It all makes sense.
Yeah.
Too bad they got bought out by Java.
Yeah. And I wanted to mention, I don't remember who asked that, but they were talking about MVC and how now people write everything in the view, And yeah, that's very common. It's terrible to see how the design of web applications and how the the clients with JavaScript, with React, and Vue, all those frameworks. It's terrible to see that how people is using those frameworks. It's like going back to the 90s, to the beginning of the 2000s when we wrote heavy clients on Windows and using Visual Basic or whatever, and everybody put all the code in the views and so on. So I guess one of the problems I see is that the people don't realize that the view also needs a model, and that's very cool to see that. And when I say the model, I'm talking about the model of the presentation of the UI, not the business model. And you can see that in Smalltalk very clear. For example, you have the browser, that is the model of the browser window, or I don't remember the name of the class. And then you have the business model, you could say that is the meta model with classes and all those things. So what I see is that people don't realize that the view has a logic, and that logic has to be moved outside from the views and put in objects that represent the model of the view. That will help a lot, and the most important thing that we could do with those kind of design is to be able to test the user interface that is very, very complicated right now. The things that people do today to test the UI is terrible, and those tests take a lot of time to run and so on. So yes, I just wanted to add that I think that we don't completely understand what model view controller is, and it's very common in our profession to change the meaning of the words. So now MVC means something completely different that used to mean back in the 80s or in the 70s. But anyway, I just wanted to share that thought with you.
Well, first I'd say even simpler is inspecting an inspector. This way you don't have to. This way, inspectors work on any object. Browsers only work on classes. You get that same kind of meta. It's like, this is the presentation of an object. Now we open up a presentation on the presenter of an object. Same idea, but less of the Smalltalk specific tough stuff about classes to understand. In terms of model view controller, it seems more like, I'm talking about the Smalltalk model view controller. Of course, the terms get co-opted. It seems more like it was an interesting experiment in the 70s when input and output were considered like different things that made sense to separate. In my experience doing UI frameworks, and I'm a big fan of direct manipulation, I found that inevitably the coupling between a view and a controller it tends to be very tight. It's really great to separate the quote view controller from the model, and the looser couple you can make those, the better. Particularly like moving from an event based system away from a dependency system, which gives you thread isolation. But I found that in doing direct manipulation, that the coupling between view and controller tend to be tight enough that it doesn't seem like it's the right split. Just splitting input and output as separate things seems like sort of a failed part of the MVC experiment of the 70s. Anyways, that's my opinion.
Okay.
Well, thanks again for coming, everyone. I need to go, so we're going to wrap it up, I think.
Thanks for setting it up, Craig.
Yeah.
Thanks, Ted, for your contribution. That's great.
Yeah. Thanks again, everyone, for coming.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye
It
all.
was great.
Bye.
It's always great to